touch the Sekimeiya or enter the room. Fuck. Okay, first off, I will actually save this. Can I? Yeah, I can put this like all the way at the back. I'm putting it there. We're saving it. By the way, we're still in chapter 1. It's been 15 hours. I guess this is the point where we go to chapter 2. Do we touch it or do we enter the room? I so want to touch it. But do we do it? We'd kind of be breaking Shira's trust. Oh, God. But then again, kind of the option of entering the room is also sort of tempting. It's presented in a way that's like, there's something's going to happen if you enter the room. And it might not be. It might be we enter the room, we go like, time skip to the to the time when the shutters open, everything's fine, game over, not game over, but credits roll, we're done. And we have to go back to the save point and touch the Sekimeiya. Possible. You all want me to touch the Sekimeiya, don't you? I'm going to enter the room, though. I'm not betraying Shira's trust. Yet. Still cupping the Sekimeiya with my shirt, I stepped into its room, where I saw the cabinet and another open door. Shira came after me, glancing at the cabinet, which was partially covered by the dark curtain. He scrolled open the glass and helped me place the Sekimeiya inside. After we closed it again, we had a question to ask ourselves. Do we lock it? I think we should. We said we wouldn't use it anymore, so there's no reason not to. I nodded after thinking about it. Akro and Sai had taken the key when they left the bedroom, so one of the two should have still had it. If they had traveled through time far enough to appear outside the tower, they wouldn't have appeared with it. So if they planned to enter once more, they should have hidden it somewhere to retrieve it easily. Nonetheless, locking it would prevent everyone else from opening it. I moved to the left side of the cabinet and crouched to manually turn the wheel. There. Only someone with the key will be able to open it. We'll stay here though, so that won't happen. She tried to move the glass and confirmed that I had locked it properly. To achieve a better effect, she pulled down the curtain and proceeded to glance around the room non-committally, unsure of what else to do. We haven't seen Eren and Kate since we left the bedroom. Do you want to search for them before you decide to stay put? She didn't answer. I thought she must have been considering the whereabouts of Akro and Sai who we had to find as well, but a single word defied my assumption. Look. Her gaze was fixed on the floor. I traced the line to, for a second time, spot a drop of blood in the middle of the room. We were right next to it and hadn't seen it easily. It was smaller than the one in the lobby, but there was a much more important distinction. This one isn't that old. Oh, this one isn't that old. It's not completely dry. Is someone walking around dripping blood? Despite what it seemed, there had to be something more to it. If what we'd seen in the lobby had only been a single drop, it must have come from a fairly serious injury. The one in front of us, though, didn't give the same impression. I looked all over the floor again and didn't see even another speck. I think we should try to find the others, in case something bad has happened. Why are you leaving the Sekimeiya alone again? I took a good look at the blood. It wasn't fully dry like the spot in the lobby, indicating that bleeding could have gone on for a while. That might have been the reason behind its smaller size. Small amounts of blood dry up fast. While many factors are involved, I could estimate it would take, say, 30 minutes for a bit of it to fully dry in our conditions. This spot is close to meeting that mark, while the one in the lobby had done so before we'd seen it. How do we do it then? Does one of us stay here to make sure nobody takes the Sekimeiya? After all we'd considered, exploring the possibility of a deliberate trap to send us out wasn't that ridiculous. In truth, the 2 drops of blood didn't feel very natural. I think we should do what we've been doing up until now. One of us stays in hallway C while the other looks through the rooms. It's unlikely anyone had an accident and bled on and off for so long. We should be careful. I wasn't opposed, so we entered hallway A. The tension had begun to grow since we'd seen blood on the floor of the lobby, so using that arrangement felt safe enough, as we wouldn't be forced to separate ourselves while searching. Moving to the mechanical room would be the only unavoidable instance of that. I'll see if I find anyone then. She nodded sharply, standing next to hallway C. Volunteering to look through some rooms was no heroic task, but I felt a bit better doing it myself. Naturally, my attention was first directed at the storeroom. I opened the door with Shiraya looking on from behind. The long corridor still extended up to the door without a handle, and I stepped in to see if I could spot any change. However, everything was identical, just as I remembered it. I had no way to know if the door had been opened from either side, but I was certain that I still couldn't do it. In front was room A5, where gems had been stolen. Although the room where Isla had been found was a more suitable name. I looked down as I entered it, knowing that I'd have to see her face again. There she was, immobile, her skin already showing a slight ashen tint. There was nothing next to her, so I quickly closed the lid and looked through the other cabinets. After I'd seen all of their harmless interiors, I moved to the next room. Deeming it vacant was an easy task, which was repeated for the next 4 identical ones. Only the security room remained. After it, I'd go to the mechanical room, make sure nobody had entered the event room, and Shiria would move toward hallway B. That would prevent anyone from using the event room as a bridge to remain hidden. But when I opened the door, I was met with a sudden and unexpected sight. My mind reeled as I stared at it, too stunned to react differently. I abruptly turned to face Shiria, who responded to my gaze with a plain expression. I yelled at her to come, and she sprinted toward me. Not only had I seen something that had put an end to the search, but I'd also realized that Shiria and I absolutely couldn't be separated. As soon as she peeked inside, she was visibly taken aback. Then she had to force herself to breathe deeply and try to look again. Once she did so, she saw she hadn't been mistaken. Kate's body was on the floor, partially under his desk. It appeared the 2 drops of blood had been a mere introduction to the sea we saw in the security room. His clothes, the desk, the floor, they'd all been splashed by the same red substance. Even after trying to process the image for a full minute, I couldn't bring myself to move. The thick smell of blood began to disperse through the open door, trying to push us away. "What is this? There's no way." At some point, she let out those words that radiated her pure disbelief. I couldn't bring myself to reply, but I took a step forward, looking all over the dimly lit room. 3 bright lights were situated in front of me. They were the 3 main monitors of the computer, which indicated that less than 50 minutes ago, it had been used. Shiria entered behind me, taking careful steps to avoid the blood that covered the majority of the floor. We looked at Kate's face under the shadow of the desk. His darkened expression looked distressed and agitated, reminiscent of the one he'd been making in the attic. I swallowed my accumulated saliva and carefully crouched to check his pulse, but I didn't feel anything. I tried not to look in Shiria's direction and continued inspecting Kate until I saw that a bit of blood was still pouring out of his skull. I didn't have to turn his head too much to see a huge crack. I immediately averted my eyes, with no doubts about what I would have seen if his white hair hadn't prevented it. I stood up, shaken by the eerie background noise that the arrhythmic sound of dripping blood and the whirring computer had joined forces to create. There's a horizontal crack in the back of his head. Given how much blood is on the desk, I think he fell on its edge. Once again, Shiria looked down at the pool of blood. It was natural for a head injury to bleed so much, and what I deduced hadn't given much away. For all we knew, it could have been an accident. The way I imagined, if he'd fallen back, he would have hit his head against the desk, ended up under it, and pushed a chair away. Despite how much blood had coated the floor, no bloody footprints could be seen leaving the room. However, the gruesome scenery obligated us to think that someone could have done it. Pushing Kate would have achieved the same result. Vast pools of blood would take a long time to dry, so I easily spotted smaller drops on the sides. Those were much closer to drying up, reminding me of the one in the event room. No matter what had happened though, he was dead. Kate, who'd been an enigma of his own and hadn't once stopped claiming his innocence, had met his sudden end right after freeing himself from confinement in the attic. "Look at the screen, there's a message." "Huh?" I quickly glanced at it. As she'd said, in the center of the middle screen, I saw a tiny message box containing one single line of text. 10:04, cameras disabled and associated footage erased. Oh, what? At 10:04? That must have been when Kate was here alone. We checked the time at 9:41. 20 minutes later was when we left, and he stayed behind, trying to fix the system. You're right, and instead he erased the existing footage and shut down the cameras. That's what this is saying. The most conspicuous hint, a message left on the computer, was potential proof that Kate had been the culprit we were trying to ferret out. I reached for the mouse found on the side of the desk and dragged the message aside. Behind it, the program Kate had attempted to display the footage with was the only thing seen on the screen. It had a list of all the cameras, but they were useless if they'd actually been disabled. I lowered my gaze. The taskbar contained a single clock we had at our disposal. As soon as I glanced at it, the numbers switched from 1659 to 1700. It's 17 o'clock. Only 4 hours are left. Let's get out of here then. From this room too, the smell is getting unbearable. I had no complaints. Even though the hallway's illumination was worse, we left the much darker room and breathed steadily after the minutes we'd spent inside. The message on the screen, without a doubt, it had belonged to the security system program, but was that full proof of its trustworthiness? With such an obvious message being found next to him, I had to ask myself if it was legitimate or a diversion left by the culprit. Not only had the scene left the possibility of an accident open, but it had also displayed an incriminating message next to Kate. Had the message been a fabrication by the real culprit to put the blame on Kate and play it off as an accident, while they'd been the ones to deal with the cameras and the security system? It wasn't easy to tell, and I wasn't sure which idea I was more inclined to lean toward. Wait, no, it doesn't make any sense, look. I followed Shira's line of sight again, that time up to the ceiling. That green light is supposed to indicate that the camera's recording, right? There's no way they were disabled so long ago. Forgotten about that, right. However, it was Kate who told us what the green light meant. We can't be certain about it. They haven't stopped flickering, and I'm sure they also were before 10. So if the cameras really aren't recording, the lights must simply indicate that they're powered on. It's strange though that Kate would tell such a lie. If he disabled the cameras, part of the reason must have been that he didn't want the police to see him when they entered. Despite that, he's incriminating himself by lying to us about what the lights mean. Yeah, that's not consistent. Could someone else have left that message to blame him? I'm not sure, but thinking about it more, there's no way this was an accident. If Kate fell backward and hit his head against the desk, he must have been exiting the room. Why would he try to leave with that incriminating message being shown on the screen? Another person must have been involved somehow. Shiria agreed with me. After a few pensive seconds being presented once again with the fact that a murderer was nearby, we had to decide on what to do. Do you want to search for the others? We should. We don't know what happened to Akro and Sai, but I'm worried about Erina. We can't split up, Atsuki. We have to stay together no matter what. He couldn't say that it was unlikely that Erina had become a target for the culprit. Kate was employed by Ashia, a member of the security staff, but Isla had died despite being a complete outsider and a child. Any of us could have been next. Yeah, okay. Let's stick together and find Erina. Let's just be extremely careful. We have nothing to defend ourselves with if we're suddenly attacked. She gave me a tense, saddened look. Even though only 4 hours remained, seeing the outside world felt much further away. Let's see if the Sekimeiya is still here. We entered the event room. The Sekimeiya hadn't been taken while our attention had been grabbed by the security room, so it was unlikely that it had been the intent of the culprit's plan. As a routine effort, I lowered the curtain again. We have to find Erina. It's not good that we haven't seen her yet. Alright, there's no need to separate at all. We're only trying to find her and she wouldn't hide from us. It could be dangerous to try to corner the culprit. Right, let's finish up this floor. We went to the lobby to access the mechanical room. Down the staircase was the strangely imposing room that might have served purposes beyond our understanding. There were some spots out of reach from the stairs, under a table or behind some chairs in the back. Stepping further in revealed the lack of any hidden person. I doubt Erina would be in a hallway B room, but let's look before going up. The first rooms we looked into was empty at the first room. Well, she might be in a hallway B room, just not alive. Not having stumbled upon anyone hadn't stopped getting more and more unsettling. We knew someone must have travelled with the Sekimeiya shortly before we had. It explored the thought that perhaps if the range had been huge, Erina could have been caught up in it and left the tower. However, Kate, who'd gone downstairs before her, should have travelled as well. Since the dryness of his blood indicated that he died almost half an hour before he'd found him, I was willing to disregard that theory. Shiri and I proceeded to the next room. Of course, if they'd travelled out of the tower after leaving the attic, it was possible Kate had re-entered the tower through the storeroom entrance and then died. If the search for Erina yielded no results, that thought would gain some traction. The next room underwent an identical search. Halfway through, we realized that searching inside the cabinets defied the point of what we'd agreed on. They were only a potential hiding spot for a culprit we decided was out of our reach. We opened the door to room B4. Past it, on the floor, Naomi's corpse reminded us that it was the room where we'd found her. The sight stopped us in place, leaving us dumbstruck. Because at her right, Erina lay, her clothes tinted maroon by all the blood on them. There we go, called it. Shiria looked at me with a clear wish to deny reality. It hit us like a truck. Erina was dead too, and only culprits we wanted to avoid remained with us. I gulped before I took short steps forward. She was lying sideways, which let us see all the blood on her chest, though not extensively on the floor. There was some on her stomach and legs too, but unlike Kate's, her expression looked almost serene, despite how the time inside the tower had been for her. When I turned around, I saw Shiria kneeling down, burying her face in her hands. Someone around us had killed a mother who'd just lost her daughter, and we would have to continue fearing that looming danger for 4 more hours. I had no words for the tragic view I was forced to accept. We stared at the scene in silence. Erina's clothes were a little torn, signaling a physical fight, and the color of the blood indicated that. Like Kate's, it had been drying up for almost enough time to no longer be considered a liquid. That's it. I can't look at her. Let's go. I lowered my head even more than it already was, clenching my fists. Seeing Shiria like that was heartbreaking, but it was ultimately impressive how strong she'd been. On my end, I only found myself rejecting reality and never fully letting the deaths we'd seen really sink in. I stepped out of the room, but I couldn't avoid turning around again and witnessing the end of 2 women we'd met that day. Give me a second. Naomi's body was covered by an elegant curtain, so I didn't want to leave Erina behind without one. The cameras might not even have been recording, so I went ahead and detached another curtain from a cabinet, laying it over Erina. With that small attempt at dignity, we left the room. We walked to the event room with lost expressions. A threatening atmosphere had reared its ugly head with more finality than before. 2 murders had recently been committed, and perhaps while we'd also been on the crystal floor, given the state of Erina's blood, it was more than likely that her body had been in that room for a while. We hadn't reacted strongly to the past 2 or 3 deaths. It wasn't that we were desensitized, but that our feelings seemed insignificant compared to what was going on or was going in that place, as if our defeat had been unavoidable from the start. There had been no time to really stop and consider the true gravity of being sealed away with 1 or more murderers, at least not for me. Thinking of ways to either avoid or root out danger had been more important. But things had changed. Shiria and I, being the only ones left, hammered in just how deadly the situation was. With all color drained from the world, we simply moved forth, feeling like birds with clipped wings trapped in a cage. I made sure the Sekimeiya was inside the cabinet and sat next to the hallway A door. Then Shiria leaned against the wall in front of me. More than likely, we were no match for the culprit behind those deaths, so there was no point in trying to do anything else. We had nowhere to possibly hide. Wishing for a calm stay, we quietly let time carry us. With nothing left to do, I meaninglessly ran through the possibility of trusting one of the others. There was one detail that felt off. Doubting that Akira and Sai were the culprits was foolish, but one thing backed it up. It was the drop of blood we'd found in the lobby. It had been completely dry, meaning that it must have been left while we'd been locked in the attic. However, the blood around Kate's and Erina's bodies had been naturally from a time after we'd unlocked the bedroom. That meant that during the time Akira and Sai should have been the only people outside the attic's bedroom, someone had lost blood. In addition, I thought that a small injury wouldn't have produced a single drop as big as that one. It could have been an accident. Akira and Sai could have fought, resulting in Akira's victory, going off the lack of injuries when he joined us again. However, the truth could have been slightly more convoluted. Perhaps Kate or Erina had traveled to the past after leaving the attic. Then they'd been attacked in the lobby, and later the culprit had finished them off. No matter what had happened, it was clear that something had occurred while we'd been at the top of the tower, and no matter who was left nearby, we didn't want to cross paths with them anymore. Nonetheless, we were guarding the Sekimeiya. We hadn't discussed it again, but it was what we'd intended to do before seeing the last 2 dead bodies. If the culprits showed themselves to obtain it, in the case we had to escape, we had a door on both sides of the room that we'd left open. I closed my eyes and left my mind blank. It felt nice after having gone over so many thoughts. As soon as I did so, different questions came to me. Instead of how, why? Why had someone killed Erina? What could anyone have gained with that? Had it been out of pure malice, having taken advantage of the disabled cameras? That didn't feel right. We all would have been killed by that point. With the Sekimeiya around, actions were bound to have more depth than they appeared to. And such a shallow motive wouldn't be portrayed by someone who'd constantly managed to remain undiscovered. I wanted to think. I couldn't be sure with Kate, but Erina hadn't done anything to warrant her death. Perhaps I thought she'd found the culprit. I went back to the little theory I'd put together. If she had travelled to the past and confronted Akra and Sai while the rest of us had been in the bedroom, that could have given them a motive for her death. Even though they were the only potential culprits, they hadn't appeared yet, so it was appropriate to think that they might not have intended to do so again. Wait, the recording! According to Akra and Sai, Erina was alive. Atsuki, what are you thinking about? Do you have any more ideas? And hey Erina, what's with that face?
Isla, what's gotten into you? What are you holding? And Erina, why aren't you doing anything?
Even though the scenario played out as if Erin and I were present, that isn't possible anymore. Who did that recording truly intend to trick? It couldn't be a coincidence that Akra and Sai were the only other people still alive and the only ones to have been mentioned in the recording. However, Erina's death nullified its chances of being real. Or did it? I tried to think about it. Even though Isla's already dead, she was the third and last person to appear in the recording. Yet her death wasn't enough to completely deny its veracity. And that's solely thanks to the Sekimeiya's existence. It's impossible that Isla's still alive. She'll be part of the recording in the future and will travel to the past to end up in the cabinet where we found her corpse. There might be different arrangements, but the gist would always be the same. Could something similar apply to Erina? Although in her case nothing supports it, the exact same thing could be going on with her, couldn't it? So not even her dead body is enough to disregard the recording, not while the Sekimeiya exists. Despite my uncomfortable position, my sight began to fade and I started to feel drowsy. Every time I rested a little, my body reminded me of how tired I was and of its strong demand for a full sleep. I saw that Shirya's eyes were shut. I wanted to resist it, but I couldn't help but close mine too, lay my head on my shoulder and put my body against the wall. I knew that my consciousness was soon to fade, but having to wait for almost another 4 hours made any attempt at preventing it futile. I let myself go, temporarily abandoning the nightmarish tower engulfed in mystery. My subconsciousness was alert at all times, aware that I was surrounded by ever-present danger. That was why, as soon as the faintest sound met my ears, all my senses came back. That was a footstep, but it sounded much more like a heel. It didn't sound like a man's shoe's footprint. What the fuck? I mean, I was right on it being a heel. As if I traveled through time, I opened my eyes, unaware of how long I'd been there for. Thanks to the open doors, I discerned the origin of the noise. I stared ahead where hallway B was. What? I froze. The dry sound of my heart echoed within me and stuttered. Just behind the door was Shirya. As soon as she looked inside the event room, she saw my piercing gaze and received it with her own. After an eternity of a second, she turned around and sped up, a figure rapidly disappearing. Then, without moving, I looked at Shirya. She was still sitting down and leaning against the wall before my very eyes, resting her head on her arms. Hey, are you awake? Shirya? Uh-huh. She lifted her face and looked at me with nearly closed eyes. Were you sleeping? Oh, sorry, yes. I stood up, clueless, my mind cluttered. No, it might sound ridiculous, but I just saw you. I dashed to hallway B. It was empty. My mind still reeling, I re-entered the event room. By the way, this just proves that, the whole theory Atsuki was operating under, that, you shouldn't be able to see your past or future self or whatever, was complete bullshit, like I said earlier. He had no basis for that. Oh, what? I'm being serious. Footsteps woke me up and I saw you in hallway B. You saw me too, but you walked toward hallway C and there's no one here. What? How long have I been asleep? I don't know. That reminded me that such a sight could have only been achieved with the Sekimeiya, so I uncovered the curtain. The Sekimeiya is still here and it's locked. I don't understand. Are you sure it was me? Yes, but There was a big difference. You were wearing different clothes. Different clothes? Were they mine? No, but I think I recognized them. You still had your coat, but you were wearing a different shirt and pants, and I think I saw them earlier in a wardrobe of the attic. She was too lost to respond, and understandably so. It meant that in the future she was guaranteed to travel to the past and live what I'd experienced, but it all went far beyond my comprehension, especially her strange behavior and clothing. Stay here for a second. I rushed out of the room and ran to hallway C. It was empty as well. Had it been a hallucination? There was no way. I was sure of what I'd seen. I circled the floor and entered the event room from hallway A. It appeared the Shiria I'd seen had deliberately hidden herself, so I wasn't sure if searching in depth was a good idea. Let's go to the attic. I need to see if I'm right about this. She gave me another confused look and approached me with her hand on her forehead. We'd wanted to spend the remainder of our time in the event room, but leaving it felt justified, as Shiria's bizarre apparition indicated that something else was going on or about to happen. Should we check the time first? Oh, probably. The hallway A was still completely vacant. Shiria had clearly seen me and had chosen to walk away. It made no sense. If that had been a future version of her, she must have known that I'd see her. It was Sai's dilemma all over again. I just explained the events to Shiria, so if she ever were to travel to the past and repeat them, she'd only be finishing off a loop without origin. It couldn't be that she'd purposely let me see her because she'd been told it had happened. If Shiria ever traveled again, she'd immediately recognize that what I'd just experienced could be about to occur, so there was no chance it would happen without her knowledge, like when she'd called the elevator in the attic. The state of the security room hadn't changed. I saw some drops of blood had fully dried up, which was consistent with the time displayed on the computer. 17:29. Shiria, are you there? It was such a nonsensical sight. The person I was calling for was next to me, but she wasn't who my shouts were directed to. Once again, if I tried to continue reasoning with my assumption that everything had to have an origin of some kind, the most simple explanation behind what had happened was that Shiria would eventually lose her memories. I was getting a headache. I wanted to finally stop all those crazy thoughts, but I couldn't. Not after the way that Shiria in the hallway had stared right through me. The elevator is still here, so if you went up, you probably didn't use it. Let's walk. She simply nodded. I understood that since she hadn't personally seen herself, she must have been too lost to take it seriously, and she was still sleepy. As I went up, I reassured myself of what I believed. Something else has to be happening. The way we think the Sekimeiya works does not explain this. Both of us wanted to stay in the event room until 2100, but it was a different Shiria who made us leave. What if whatever is about to happen leads into Shiria traveling and she experiences her part of what I just lived? That doesn't make a single bit of sense. Again, the reason why we left the room would be because we left the room and then made ourselves leave the room. There's something clearly missing. Not only is this a bootstrap paradox, but it also goes against our own interests. We had every intention of staying there, so what could the meaning behind what I just saw actually be? I hoped that whatever the attic contained, it would be a hint to that answer. Shiria had been dressed in clothes I thought I'd seen up there, which amplified how unlikely that bootstrap was to occur. Why had she been dressed in clothes from the attic? Instead of going over how unlikely causal loops were, I had to shift my approach. The answer had to be something that wouldn't directly come from me having seen her wearing her clothes. However, that had already happened and I told her about it. So what remained possible? What could the masked answer have been? Reason. That was what I needed to locate. We arrived at the entrance to the attic. The key was still in the keyhole, so we began to go up the narrow staircase. A reason behind the Shiria I just saw, who still has to be somewhere. Is it a coincidence that the hardest mysteries to solve have involved double selves? Now that I think about it, almost everyone but me has produced this mystery individually. Naomi's body appeared dead twice. Sai existed both in the attic and on the crystal floor, and simple time travel couldn't explain it. What about the Akara who had different memories? Isla and Erina have died despite the fact they are supposed to be alive in the future. Now a Shiria that's very hard to explain with poor time travel has suddenly shown herself. The core mystery is always the origin of the extra person, and their reason for existing. Something else might have been happening right under our noses and we just haven't noticed yet. Could it be related to A second Kate hasn't appeared. Could the reason behind that be linked to what Akru said? He didn't know who Kate was, but he knew me. It doesn't seem like anyone's been here recently, going off the floor. We entered, leaving behind the first footprints in a while. If anyone had entered or exited the attic, they must have used the elevator. However, since the key had still been placed in the keyhole, it was unlikely the elevator had been used to enter it. I believe it's in the right bedroom. The wardrobe had a few articles of clothing. That one, right? I saw them too. I nodded and walked to it. Inside, a few old-looking clothes hung in the empty space. I thought so. You were wearing these. I took out a moderately sized white shirt and dark pants, neither of which looked to have been designed for a young girl. These? I'm not sure I like them. Well, there isn't much else to choose from. I suppose, yeah. I imagine I'd pick these if I wanted to use this wardrobe to dress up. And you were wearing them, even though they're here. Very lost about this, but does it mean that I'll go back to the past with them? I don't know. Could something else have been the answer? I thought about that first. I'd just put together that it was very unlikely anyone had entered the attic recently. That meant that the Shiria I'd seen couldn't have dashed up to the attic to leave those clothes back in the wardrobe. I didn't imagine that had happened, but it wasn't out of the question. If that Shiria had possessed another key to the attic, she could have come faster than us while we'd gone to the security room. I wasn't sure if she could have used a single key we knew existed. The elevator had probably been on the crystal floor, so if she'd had the key, she would have had to go up with it, leave the clothes behind, take the elevator down to the 6th floor, send it to the crystal floor, and place the key back in the attic's keyhole. Even though they look the same, I'm willing to assume these clothes aren't the exact same ones I saw you wearing, meaning that 2 identical sets exist at the moment if your other self is still here somewhere. It feels pointless trying to think about how it happened when I'm completely clueless as to why it did. However, if you'll travel to the past and see me in the event room, something similar to a last travel has to happen. You mean that I'd need to wear the clothes for a while and then travel with the Sekimeiya? Then I'd have to appear far back enough and the replicated location would have to be from the time I was wearing the clothes. I was getting incredibly overwhelmed. As she'd said, that was a way to accomplish it. Other arrangements existed, such as traveling far to the past, borrowing the clothes, seeing me in the event room, and eventually going to the past again to return them to the wardrobe. Nonetheless, it didn't make any sense. Why would she do that? It was so bizarre and unlike anything else that had happened that I couldn't think of even a semi-logical explanation. Let me see. It's possible we'll come across that version of you again, even though she didn't look too surprised to see me. Just in case we do. I opened the drawers and took a marker out. I hope this hasn't dried yet. If these cameras are actually still working, I might get in trouble for this, but it could tell us something of value. You're gonna leave a mark? Yes, washing it won't get rid of it, so I'll make it tiny. On the collar of the shirt, I drew a tiny black cross. The more I think about it, the more unlikely it seems that whatever happened was accomplished by traveling from the future. It would be a loop without origin, which is not how a consistent timeline would work. Just like I'd thought when we'd been locked up, there was a way to place the origin of the loop inside Shiria's mind. If in the event room she'd created a plan in which a future self of hers would lure us out to accomplish something, and she'd later travel to fulfill reality, I'd begin to accept it as possible. Since it had happened to Shiria though, I wasn't able to reason it out like that. If we ever see that version of you again and you're wearing these clothes, I'll check this spot. If the mark is there, it'll mean that you traveled from the future with it, somehow. If it's not, that'll tell us the truth is different. If we couldn't see the mark, there wouldn't be many ways to make it happen involving having traveled from the future, and they'd all have to rely on leaving the clothes back in the wardrobe before we'd seen them. Once again, I couldn't help but experience an impending and threatening pressure when I tried to think about what reason could have existed behind it all. I left the marker inside the drawer and sat on the bed. Shiria joined me at my side, evidently not having yet accepted that a mysterious version of her was probably roaming around downstairs. You don't plan to travel to the past or put on those clothes, right? How could what I saw have happened if you'll never make it happen? I won't, no, and I don't know either. I think it's just as strange as you're making that out to be. I played the moment back in my head, that expressionless person who'd unmistakably been Shiria. What had her thoughts been at the time? I lay back in frustration. That had been the first time the bizarre double body situation had happened to someone I could trust and freely speak with, but she had no idea what the meaning behind it could have been. Perhaps that also applied to every other case. It could be that if we'd asked the original Naomi, she wouldn't have been able to explain the existence of her double self. Could something have been creating a replica of ourselves without our notice? There was no way. Otherwise the Shiria I'd seen would have run to me as soon as she'd seen me. And even if she'd had a reason to borrow the clothes from the attic, if that was the answer, they wouldn't have still been in the wardrobe. I clicked my tongue, sighed, and rolled on the bed. I hated everything about it. When I looked at Shiria, all I got from her face was a despondent expression. That version of you must have had some goal. If she'd somehow been lost or had suddenly popped into existence, she wouldn't have ignored me. What kind of goal? Well, look at what she accomplished. By wearing clothes from the attic, not responding to my shouts, and quickly hiding from view, she brought us here. You think I wanted to lead us far away from the event room? Honestly, what else could it be? That's where the Sekimeiya is. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm sure you must have had a good reason, if that's what happened. No, that can't be it. I'm sure I don't want to touch the Sekimeiya again. But you could have come from the future with further knowledge and an actual goal to achieve. You just said earlier that it can't be that, right? Even if in the future I think of a good reason to travel back to this point and use the Sekimeiya, I'd know how to do it because I would have already lived it. I'd be repeating what you saw thanks to the fact that I repeated what you saw. That can't be it. I couldn't object. I'd used the same argument to deny many theories, but it wasn't fully reliable as we didn't know the rules of the universe regarding time travel. Let's go back down, I suppose. We'll see if the Sekimeiya is still there, and there's the chance we'll see you again. Okay. Accompanied by an unsettling, gloomy mood, we entered the hallway. We weren't feeling too energetic, so we called the elevator. After a few seconds, the button lit up orange. I opened the door and entered after her. After pressing the lowest button, I leaned on the uncomfortable handrail and wished for everything to finally end. We began to descend, surrounded by the unassuming sound of the elevator's motion and my deep sighs. Huh? Shira also realized that we'd stopped earlier than expected. As the secondary doors opened, we saw the floor free button blinking. Did you hit it accidentally? No. We looked at each other, puzzled, before staring at the opaque door that led to the third floor. We were unaware of what awaited us, but we expected something to happen. Someone must have pressed the button while we were inside. However, the door didn't immediately open. The only explanation was that someone had called it from the third floor, but they weren't taking the ride. I timidly reached forward and pushed the door. A desolate corridor came into view, with zero apparent signs of life. Don't see anyone. I stepped out with Shiria right behind. I looked at the button, but nothing indicated whether it had been pressed. You're sure you didn't hit it, right? Yeah, definitely. Oh, the elevator kept moving to the crystal floor. Shiria called it again as I walked a few mindless steps, attempting to comprehend what could have happened. Did someone run away after pressing the button? I approached the stairs, the most likely route anyone would have chosen to hide in a rush. I couldn't immediately see anyone, so we'd have to choose which way to go. There's really no one here. Should we keep going down? I guess so. Maybe you should continue on foot. It could have been the other version of you. Okay. Our synchronized footsteps began to echo around the wide interior, setting up an uncomfortable atmosphere we'd gotten very familiar with. I was barely ahead of Shiria. After a few steps, I reached the left turn where the entrance to the partitions was. What? Out of nowhere, I saw a hand gripping a knife swing toward me.